Welcome to today's explainer. We're gonna push past the heavy iron doors of the forbidden Imperial archives to uncover a mystery that absolutely shatters everything we thought we knew about galactic history. Today, we're tracking down a Space Marine chapter that wasn't just defeated on the battlefield. It was completely, systematically deleted from existence. We are talking about burning hive cities, massive void battles, and heroes who literally saved entire worlds, all of it aggressively scrubbed from human memory. Officially, they never existed at all. It's hard to wrap your head around, but across thousands of worlds, battle honors just vanished. Crucial records inked on ancient parchment either dissolved into ash or were suddenly stamped with massive red purity seals of censorship. Veteran officers who actually bled beside these warriors suddenly found themselves handed completely contradictory fabricated versions of their own lives. The Imperium didn't just censor this chapter, you guys. They surgically cut them out of reality. So we're looking at this terrifying contradiction. On one hand, you have the official lie, a perfectly stable, peaceful frontier sector. But on the other hand, buried deep in corrupted data fragments, we find the absolute truth. A brutal war zone where millions of people died, where impossible ghost fleets were reported, and an entire chapter of Space Marines was erased. This was a massive cover-up. The Imperium came face to face with something so unspeakable that they actively chose absolute ignorance over preserving the truth. But why? What could possibly be that dangerous? Think about how this actually played out over the centuries. A strategically vital, heavily defended frontier just morphed, slowly becoming this region of creeping, inexplicable cosmic dread. For decades, everything was totally stable, but then civilian ships just started vanishing. Sporadic at first, then entire ghost ships were sighted, and eventually an entire Imperial battle group. We're talking cruisers, escorts, thousands of personnel just gone. No distress calls, no wreckage, just total eerie absence. The frontier was bleeding out, and the Imperium desperately needed answers. To find those answers, the Imperium sent in the absolute best, a highly specialized Space Marine chapter, though their exact name and heraldry have been violently scrubbed from every database we have. These guys were the premier experts in deep space reconnaissance, highly mobile, capable of operating completely autonomously for decades on end. They were famously independent, known for getting results where standard explorator fleets and inquisitors just totally failed. Honestly, they were the perfect hunters for a mystery like this. What they found pieced together from a totally corrupted astropathic transmission is just chilling. Now, we know the warp is a dimension of pure chaos, right? The roots naturally shift all the time. But the chapter discovered something completely impossible. The roots weren't just shifting randomly. They were being manipulated deliberately, intelligently by a force actually capable of engineering the chaotic dimension of the warp itself. Through long-range monitoring, the chapter started detecting this highly coordinated fleet activity pacing the disrupted warp routes. And here's the kicker. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't orcs or Eldar or a Tyranid hive fleet. These unknown vessels would just appear for a moment, always keeping just out of reliable sensor range, always observing, and then they'd vanish. They belonged to literally none of humanity's known enemies. They were a completely unknown entity just watching from the dark. It really forces the question, how on earth do you mount a defense against a shadow? Imperial commanders were endlessly arguing, convinced these had to be sensor glitches or maybe some new Xenos tech. But the chapter ignored the bureaucracy and kept pushing deeper into the dark, gathering data. And then sudden absolute blackout. Every single strike force, every vessel, every listening post belonging to the chapter went instantly completely silent. The entire sector was suddenly blind. When this hidden enemy finally decided to strike, They didn't go for glorious set-piece military victories. Instead, they demonstrated this horrifyingly sophisticated patience. They went straight for the supply networks, burning fuel depots, taking out food production centers, effectively crippling the Imperium's ability to even send reinforcements. It was only after the defenders were completely isolated, starving, and trapped that the enemy finally engaged the military fortresses. The aftermath of these attacks was frankly impossible to comprehend. Picture a massive planetary bombardment, entire hive cities reduced to rubble, ash choking the atmosphere. And yet, when Imperial investigators finally arrived on the scene, there was nothing of the enemy left behind. No bodies, no destroyed ships, absolutely zero recoverable technology. It was as if these attackers were intentionally erasing their own existence in real time, leaving the Imperium swinging wildly at phantoms. Right before all communications completely died, the chapter managed to transmit a few fragmented descriptions of what they actually found at the source of these anomalies way out beyond charted space. They found impossible megastructures, giant machines older than recorded history, bigger than massive hive cities. They had been hiding dormant in the dark, but now they were waking up. It meant some ancient presence had been quietly shaping events on the frontier for an unimaginably long time. This wasn't just a physical war. This was an attack on the Imperium's greatest vulnerability, its own bureaucracy. By systematically destroying navigation beacons and silencing astropathic choirs, the enemy crippled communications. And it worked perfectly. Every missing report, every single contradictory record paralyzed the Imperial command structure. Fleet movements were completely confused. The enemy literally weaponized information, ensuring that absolutely nobody knew what was actually going on. In the middle of all this absolute bureaucratic collapse and outright panic, a heavily damaged chapter vessel suddenly dropped out of the warp. Out of a crew of thousands, thousands of elite battle-hardened space marines and support staff, just 24 remained. Just 24 incoherent survivors limping home on a ghost ship. These poor traumatized survivors couldn't offer any tactical data at all. No explanation for the missing years, no account of how all their brothers were slaughtered. They just sat there in the dark, repeating one single terrifying phrase over and over again. We reached the edge. What edge? The edge of the galaxy, the edge of reality itself. The official records, naturally, offer absolutely zero explanation. They immediately quarantined the vessel, and for good reason. It wasn't just battle damaged. It had been fused with blasphemous, completely unrecognizable technology. We aren't talking about chaos corruption or known Xenos tech. These were entirely alien devices, somehow seamlessly integrated into the ship's core systems. It terrified the Imperial experts, and it raised a really explosive question. Did the chapter find and recover forbidden technology, or had something out there fundamentally altered them? Data ripped from that quarantined ship's databanks pointed to a pure cosmic horror. The warp anomalies, not natural, they were engineered. Those devastating logistics attacks, just preparatory steps. But the absolute worst part was that the enemy wasn't actually invading from the outside. They had been there all along, dormant beneath the planetary crusts for centuries. Entire generations of Imperial citizens had literally been living their lives right on top of this unimaginable threat. Soon after, these massive unknown fleets finally committed to open warfare across multiple star systems. But as the Imperial defense lines rapidly collapsed, commanders noticed something deeply terrifying. The enemy had such precise, intimate knowledge of Imperial deployments that it defied logic. It sparked this paranoid, unanswerable question. Was there espionage? Had something infiltrated deep within the Imperium's own command institutions? The answer to that actually lies in the chapter's final desperate transmission before they were lost for good. They realized they couldn't win, but not because they lacked firepower. They couldn't win because they finally understood the enemy's true nature. The enemy's greatest weapon was knowledge itself. The more the Imperium observed, studied, and understood this threat, the exponentially more dangerous it became. To know them was to empower them. The Imperial leadership was utterly terrified by this mind-bending revelation, so they didn't launch a massive crusade. Instead, they initiated an unprecedented systemic purge. Emergency quarantines were thrown up on day one. By week one, entire archives were locked behind iron doors. Within 6 months, key witnesses were permanently silenced or reassigned. And in just 1 year, the scribes had completely, systematically rewritten history itself. And just like that, the war abruptly ended, not with some grand, decisive victory, but just silence. The enemy fleets vanished. The toll, though, was catastrophic. Dozens of worlds burning, millions of citizens dead, entire naval fleets totally lost, and a founding Space Marine chapter completely erased from existence. It's a staggering cost, one that official Imperial scribes, even to this day, pretend simply never happened, which leads us to a really provocative, unsettling theory. What if this wasn't just a petty administrative cover-up of a massive military failure? What if the chapter discovered something so inherently dangerous that preserving the truth of what they did posed a much greater threat to humanity than destroying the record? What if erasing them from history was literally the only way to save the sector? Because the Imperium deliberately torched the data, we are left staring into a terrifying void of information. Who actually were they? What exactly is at that edge the survivor spoke of? And most chillingly of all, did this enemy, an enemy that manipulated reality and infrastructure with terrifying ease, actually leave? Or did they just go back to sleep beneath the surface? The true dread here, the thing that really keeps you up at night, is the scale of time involved. We are talking about a cosmic force that thinks, plans, and executes in centuries. It doesn't think like a human general. It doesn't need a quick, immediate victory. For all we know, it might view this entire devastating conflict, a war that cost millions of human lives, as nothing more than a minor preliminary scouting mission. It just requires time. Maybe the cover-up wasn't cowardice. Maybe it was the defense mechanism itself. The Imperium might have deleted these files, totally erasing this chapter, specifically to prevent any future curious investigator from poking around and inadvertently reawakening the enemy. The blank spaces in the archives, they might be the only safe way to document a threat that actively feeds on being known. So I'm gonna leave you with this final chilling thought from the dark, silent edges of the galaxy. If this enemy successfully weaponized our own knowledge and our bureaucracy against us, if victory truly belongs to whoever controls the historical record, then whose story are we actually living in? Was erasing this chapter humanity's desperate triumph? Or did the enemy force the Imperium to do its own dirty work? Think about that next time you look up at the stars.